Silent Guests. Chapter 7. What Amelia Knew. For several seconds, Lucy Gilmore and Oliver Reed simply stared at the notebook. It lay partly concealed beneath a fallen shelf, surrounded by books that had scattered across the music room floor in untidy heaps. Some had landed open, their yellowing pages bent beneath their own weight, while others had slid almost as far as the dusty grand piano beside the windows. The room smelled of damp stone, old paper, and the cold sea air blowing through the open French doors. Beyond them, the balcony glistened beneath a fine mist of rain, and the last visible footprints were already beginning to soften at their edges. Oliver moved first. "Don't touch anything." Lucy glanced at him. "I wasn't going to." "I know." "Then why say it?" "Habit." Despite everything, the exchange almost made her smile. Oliver crossed carefully toward the French doors, avoiding the wet footprints closest to the threshold. The balcony ran along the western side of Ravensmere House before narrowing around the corner, where a steep iron staircase descended towards a lower terrace. From there, anyone could have crossed the gardens or entered the house through one of several ground floor doors. Whoever had been in the music room had chosen their escape route well. Oliver crouched beside the nearest footprint. Small. Lucy remained inside. Meaning? Meaning it's a small footprint. She gave him a look. That's exceptionally useful. It's more useful than pretending it tells me whether it belonged to a man or woman. He stood and examined the balcony. The rain's already destroying them. "Can you photograph them?" Oliver looked towards her. "Do you have your phone?" Lucy took it from her pocket. No signal doesn't mean no camera. Exactly. She photographed the prints from several angles while Oliver remained beside the doorway, occasionally directing her towards details she might otherwise have missed. There were perhaps 7 clear impressions in total, all leading away from the music room. None appeared to approach it. "That doesn't make sense," Lucy said. "It might." "How?" They entered another way. She looked back into the room. The only obvious entrance was the corridor door behind them. "Through the house." "Possibly. Which means whoever ran onto the balcony knew we were coming." Oliver nodded. "They heard us." Lucy looked at the fallen bookcase. "And knocked that over?" "Perhaps accidentally. Or deliberately." Oliver glanced towards her. "To make us come running? Or to make sure we found this?" Her eyes returned to Amelia's notebook. That possibility changed the room. Until then, Lucy had assumed the notebook had been dropped or hidden and accidentally exposed when the shelf collapsed. Now she considered the alternative. Someone wanted them to find it. Oliver seemed to reach the same conclusion. "Stay there." He crossed to the doorway and looked along the corridor. Nobody. Then he called loudly enough for his voice to carry. "Dr. Shaw?" Footsteps approached less than a minute later. Henry appeared first, followed closely by Andrew and Evelyn. Marcus arrived moments afterwards, irritation already replacing concern when he realized nobody had been injured. "What happened?" Henry asked. Oliver gestured towards the fallen bookcase. "Someone was in here." Andrew looked toward the open balcony. "Who?" "That's what I'd like to know." Marcus folded his arms. "Another invisible person?" Oliver ignored the comment. Helen appeared at the end of the corridor, walking more slowly than the others. Elliot followed behind her. Neil came last. Within minutes, every surviving guest stood outside the music room. Lucy watched their faces as they noticed the notebook. Andrew recognized the name first. "Oh, God." Marcus leaned slightly closer. "Is that hers?" Nobody needed to ask whose. Oliver turned towards Neil. "When was this room last used?" Neil stared at the fallen shelf. "Years ago." "How many?" "I couldn't tell you exactly. Arthur stopped using the West Wing after Amelia died." Lucy looked around. "Why?" Neil hesitated. "She played piano." The covered instrument suddenly became impossible to ignore. "She played in here?" Evelyn asked. "Almost every evening when she was home." Neil's voice softened. "Arthur used to sit in the corridor pretending to read because Amelia hated anyone listening while she practiced." Andrew smiled sadly. "That sounds like him." It does. Neil looked towards the piano. After she died, he closed the room. Oliver nodded towards the notebook. Have you seen that before? Neil looked carefully. No. You're certain? I knew Amelia kept journals. Did Arthur? Of course. Did he have them? Neil shook his head. Not all of them. Lucy felt something shift. What do you mean? Neil seemed surprised the detail mattered. Some disappeared after Amelia died. How many? I don't know. Why would they disappear? Neil looked towards the notebook. We assumed she'd taken them somewhere. Marcus gave a short laugh. She was dead. Neil's expression hardened. I am aware of that. Marcus immediately regretted the remark. I didn't mean... No. Neil turned away. You rarely do. The tension between them lasted only seconds, but Lucy noticed it. So did Oliver. Marcus cleared his throat and said nothing more. Oliver looked around the corridor. I need to know where everyone was during the last 15 minutes. A collective weariness passed through the group. Marcus actually laughed. Again? Yes. You can't seriously expect us to account for every minute we spend in this house. Until the police arrive, I expect exactly that. Something in Oliver's tone ended the argument. One by one they answered. Andrew had been in the archive room. Henry had been downstairs with Neil until shortly before the crash. Neil confirmed it. Helen had been in the drawing room. Marcus claimed he had been in his bedroom. Evelyn had been sketching in the conservatory. Elliot had been photographing the eastern side of the house. Lucy watched Oliver write everything down. Then she realized nobody could confirm Marcus. Nobody could confirm Helen. Nobody could confirm Evelyn. Nobody could confirm Elliot. 4 people, 4 opportunities. Oliver closed the notebook. Nobody enters this room until the police arrive. Andrew looked towards Amelia's journal. You're not going to read it? No. Marcus stared at him. You cannot be serious. It may be evidence. It may tell us why Arthur was killed. That's precisely why it may be evidence. Marcus stepped closer. We're trapped in a house with someone who may have murdered our host, and you want to wait politely for the police while the answer sits on the floor? Oliver's expression remained controlled. Yes. Marcus shook his head. That is insane. No. Helen spoke from the corridor. It is inconvenient. Everyone looked towards her. She continued calmly. Those are not the same thing. Marcus stared at the retired judge. Helen met his gaze without blinking. We have already contaminated half this house simply by living in it. Mr. Reed is correct. Curiosity does not entitle us to destroy evidence. Marcus looked as though he wanted to argue, but eventually stepped away. Oliver gave Helen a grateful nod. Thank you. Don't thank me. Her eyes settled upon Amelia's notebook. I want to read it every bit as much as he does. That earned the faintest smile from Oliver. Lucy remained near the doorway. Something bothered her. Not the notebook. The dust. She looked at the floor again. Most surfaces inside the music room carried a fine gray layer accumulated over years of disuse. Even the fallen books had left clean rectangular marks where they had rested untouched upon the shelves. The notebook was clean. They had already noticed that, but something else was clean too. A narrow section of the piano bench. Lucy stepped closer without touching it. Oliver. He followed her gaze. A rectangular patch in the dust showed where something had recently rested, roughly the size of a book. Oliver crouched. The notebook. Maybe. Lucy looked towards the fallen shelf. If it was originally on the bench, it didn't fall from the bookcase. Oliver examined the distance between them. No. So somebody moved it. Recently. How recently? He studied the disturbed dust. Impossible to say. Lucy looked around the room. Someone had entered a room supposedly untouched for years. Someone had taken Amelia's notebook from wherever it had been hidden. Someone had placed it on the piano bench. Then something had happened that left the bookcase overturned and the notebook on the floor. The discovery no longer felt accidental. It felt staged. Lucy turned toward the group gathered outside. For the first time, she understood something that frightened her more than Arthur's locked study. The murderer might not simply be hiding evidence. They might be controlling what everyone discovered. Oliver locked the music room using a key Neil retrieved from the housekeeper's cabinet. The group returned downstairs reluctantly. Nobody separated this time. Whether by instruction or instinct, they gathered in the drawing room, where the remains of the morning fire still glowed beneath the mantelpiece. The leather folder sat on the small table, where Oliver had placed it the previous evening. Arthur's empty chair remained beside the fireplace. Nobody chose to sit in it. Lucy settled near the window. Outside, the tide had retreated enough to reveal the upper stones of the causeway. The mainland remained hidden behind mist, but for the first time since Arthur's death, escape appeared physically possible. "When exactly are the police coming?" Marcus asked. Neil checked the clock. "They should have reached the mainland end by now." "Should? The causeway isn't safe the moment the water disappears." Marcus exhaled sharply. "So we wait." "We wait." Andrew sat forward. "There's something I don't understand." Oliver looked towards him. "Only one thing?" Andrew almost smiled. "Arthur spent 10 years investigating Amelia's work." "Yes." "He collected letters, photographs, newspaper cuttings, records." He gestured towards the leather folder. "Why wouldn't he have her journals?" Lucy understood his point. Neil answered, "Because he couldn't find them." "But one was inside his own house?" "Apparently." Andrew frowned. "That doesn't feel right." Henry looked towards him. "What are you suggesting?" "Maybe Arthur wasn't the person who hid them." The room became quiet. Andrew continued, gaining confidence as he spoke. "Amelia was an investigative journalist. If she believed somebody was following her, and if she was frightened enough to tell Henry about it, perhaps she hid things deliberately." "From Arthur?" Lucy asked. "Not necessarily." Andrew looked around the room. "From whoever was following her." Helen nodded thoughtfully. "That would explain why the journals disappeared immediately after her death." Marcus frowned. "Would it? If someone searched for them?" The possibility settled heavily over the room. Lucy looked towards Henry. "When Amelia came to the hospital, why was she there?" Henry's expression changed, only slightly, but Lucy saw it. "So far," she continued, "you've told us she believed someone was following her. You haven't told us why she was at the hospital in the first place." Henry remained silent. Oliver looked towards him. "Dr. Shaw?" Henry took off his glasses. For several seconds, he cleaned lenses that were already perfectly clear. She had been injured. Lucy felt the hairs rise along her arms. "How?" "A cut to her hand." Marcus looked confused. "That's it?" "No." Henry replaced his glasses. "She also had bruising around her wrist." "From what?" "She said someone grabbed her." Nobody spoke. Lucy remembered Henry's previous insistence upon confidentiality. His reluctance no longer seemed merely professional. "You didn't believe her," she said. Henry looked at her sharply. "I didn't say that." "You didn't need to." He stared at Lucy for several seconds before looking away. "When somebody arrives in A&E frightened, exhausted, and convinced they're being followed, there are procedures." "What procedures?" "Medical assessment, safeguarding, questions about immediate danger." "And?" Henry swallowed. "She refused most of it." "Why?" "She said she couldn't trust anyone." Lucy felt the sentence settle into the room. She couldn't trust anyone. Arthur had spent 10 years trying to understand what Amelia meant. Now he was dead too. Helen spoke quietly. "Did Amelia tell you who grabbed her?" "No." "Did she say where it happened?" Henry hesitated. "Yes." Oliver immediately noticed. "Where?" Henry looked towards the windows. "Outside a hotel in Edinburgh." Lucy frowned. "Which hotel?" Henry's answer came reluctantly. "The Calder Hotel." Marcus Hale's coffee cup struck its saucer with a sharp porcelain click. Everyone turned towards him. For the first time since arriving on Caerwyn Island, the businessman appeared completely unprepared. Lucy watched the color leave his face. "You know it," she said. Marcus didn't answer. "Marcus." His eyes remained fixed upon Henry. Oliver leaned forward. "What is the Calder Hotel?" Marcus swallowed. When he finally spoke, none of his usual confidence remained. "It belonged to my family." Nobody spoke. Marcus Hale seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time since arriving on Caerwyn Island, that silence could be more uncomfortable than any accusation. He remained seated, with one hand resting beside his coffee cup, staring at Henry as though the doctor had reached backwards through 10 years and placed something long buried directly onto the table between them. Lucy watched him carefully. Until now, Marcus had possessed an almost irritating ability to remain comfortable in every situation. He filled awkward pauses with conversation, responded to suspicion with humor, and treated the absence of a mobile signal as though it were the greatest hardship Ravensmere House could inflict upon him. Even after Arthur's death, he had maintained the polished confidence of a man accustomed to walking into rooms and deciding what everyone else should think of him. That confidence had disappeared. Oliver broke the silence. "Your family owned the Calder Hotel." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes." "When?" "My father bought it in 2008. We sold it 6 years later." Oliver glanced towards Henry. "Amelia attended your hospital 10 years ago." "Approximately." Marcus looked at him. "What year?" Henry hesitated. 2016. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Lucy knew the answer before he spoke. "My family still owned it." Andrew shifted in his chair. "Did you work there?" Marcus looked towards him. "I worked for the company." "That wasn't the question." The correction came from Helen. Marcus stared at her. "No," he said eventually. "I didn't work behind reception, if that's what you're asking. My father owned several properties. I helped manage the business." "Including the Calder?" Oliver asked. "Yes." "How often were you there?" Marcus gave a small shrug. "Sometimes twice a week, sometimes not for a month." Lucy watched his hands. He had stopped moving them. For someone who normally spoke with his entire body, the stillness was conspicuous. "Did you know Amelia?" she asked. "No." The answer came too quickly. Oliver noticed. Helen noticed. Lucy suspected everyone did. She leaned slightly forward. "Did you know who she was?" Marcus looked directly at her. "I knew the name." A different answer. "When?" "I don't remember." "Before she died?" Marcus hesitated. "Yes." The atmosphere in the room changed. Andrew stared at him. "You said yesterday that you'd never met Arthur before." "I hadn't. But you knew his daughter." "I knew of her." Lucy kept her voice calm. "How?" Marcus rubbed his jaw. "She contacted the hotel." "When?" "I don't remember the exact date." "What did she want?" "She was a journalist. She wanted information." "About what?" Marcus looked toward the windows. That was the problem. Nobody interrupted him. "She wouldn't tell us." Oliver frowned. "She contacted your hotel asking for information, but refused to say what she was investigating?" "She asked about former employees." "What employees?" "Several." "Names?" "I don't remember all of them." Helen's expression hardened. "All of them?" Marcus realized his mistake. Lucy saw it happen. He had revealed more than he intended. "So you remember some?" Marcus looked towards her. "Yes." "Who?" He exhaled slowly. "There was a porter named Edward Bell." Lucy felt something cold move through her. Oliver had already opened his notebook. "Edward Bell." "Yes." "E.B." Marcus looked towards Elliot. "So it would appear." Every eye moved instinctively towards the photographer. Elliot did not seem relieved. If anything, he looked more troubled. Lucy understood why. The initials that had placed suspicion upon him now belonged to a man none of them had ever heard of, yet the coincidence remained uncomfortable. Oliver continued. "Who was Edward Bell?" "An employee." "You've established that." Marcus looked irritated. "He worked nights. Porter, security, whatever needed doing." "And Amelia wanted information about him?" "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know." "Did you give her any?" Marcus shook his head. My father refused. Why? He said employee records were confidential. Helen gave a quiet, humorless laugh. Businesses become remarkably devoted to confidentiality when journalists appear. Marcus looked at her. I didn't make the decision, but you supported it. Another hesitation. At the time, yes. Lucy heard something beneath the words. At the time? Marcus looked down. Edward Bell had already left. Why? Marcus didn't answer. Oliver waited. It was becoming clear that he understood silence better than anyone else in the room. He never rushed to fill it. He simply allowed discomfort to grow until people decided speaking was preferable. Marcus eventually gave in. There had been complaints. What kind? Guests said things went missing. Money? Jewelry, watches, small things. Was he stealing? We never proved it. Then why did he leave? Marcus rubbed both hands across his face. My father paid him. The room became still. Andrew frowned. Paid him to leave? Yes. Why? To avoid trouble. Helen's voice was cold now. What trouble? Marcus looked towards her. My father believed an accusation against an employee would damage the hotel. So he gave money to a man suspected of stealing from guests. Yes. And didn't contact the police. No. Helen leaned back. That was extraordinarily irresponsible. I know. You knew then. Marcus's expression hardened. I was 28 years old and trying desperately to prove myself to a father who considered disagreement a personal betrayal. For once, there was no charm in his voice, only anger, mostly directed at himself. I did what he told me. Nobody answered. Marcus looked around the room. You all want secrets? He gave a bitter laugh. There's mine. Lucy studied him. Why didn't you tell Arthur? I was going to. When? After his presentation. That sounds convenient. It happens to be true. Marcus looked directly at her. When Arthur's invitation arrived, I recognized Amelia's surname immediately. I assumed that was why he'd contacted me. And you still came? Yes. Why? The anger disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Marcus stared towards Arthur's empty chair. Because I've spent 10 years wondering what Amelia found. That answer felt different. Lucy believed him. It did not mean he was innocent, but she believed that sentence. The conversation continued for almost 20 minutes. Marcus remembered little else about Edward Bell. He had been somewhere in his 40s, quiet, reliable until the complaints began, and apparently without close family in Edinburgh. After leaving the Calder Hotel, he disappeared from the company's records entirely. Arthur had never contacted Marcus directly about Bell. That seemed important. If Arthur had spent 10 years tracing Amelia's investigation, why invite Marcus without revealing what he already knew? Lucy began to understand Arthur's method. He hadn't simply gathered sources. He had gathered witnesses. Perhaps he wanted to hear what each person said before showing them what he had discovered. That possibility made his death feel even more deliberate. Someone had prevented the comparison from happening. Oliver closed his notebook. Until we know otherwise, Edward Bell gives us another interpretation of E.B. Marcus looked towards Elliot. I suppose I owe you an apology. Elliot considered him. For what? For assuming you were connected. You weren't the only one. No. Marcus managed a faint smile. I was simply the loudest. Elliot nodded. That does seem to be your speciality. Andrew laughed before immediately looking guilty for doing so. To Lucy's surprise, Marcus laughed too. The tension loosened. Only slightly, but enough to remind them that they were still human beings rather than names on Oliver's growing list of suspects. Then Elliot spoke again. I want to show you something. He reached for his camera. Oliver watched closely as Elliot scrolled backwards through the photographs. What? The picture of Arthur. He found it. Arthur beneath the cedar tree. His face turned towards the unseen person beyond the frame. Elliot enlarged the image. I kept thinking about what you said. Lucy moved closer. About someone being outside the photograph? Yes. Elliot zoomed further. The quality deteriorated slightly. Arthur's face became grainy. The cedar trunk filled most of the screen behind him. Look here. Elliot pointed toward the lower left corner. At first, Lucy saw nothing. Then she noticed a reflection. Tiny, distorted, captured in a rain-covered metal plaque attached to a bench several yards behind Arthur. Oliver took the camera carefully. My God! The reflection showed only part of a person, a shoulder, an arm, perhaps the side of a coat, no face, no useful identifying features. But one detail was unmistakable. The person held something, a book or notebook. Lucy felt her stomach tighten. Could that be Amelia's journal? Andrew asked. Oliver shook his head. Impossible to say. But it's the right size. It could be any book. Lucy stared at the image. Arthur had met someone beside the cedar tree, someone carrying a notebook. Hours later, Arthur was dead. The following morning, Amelia's journal had appeared inside a room that had supposedly remained closed for years. Those events could no longer be dismissed as unrelated. Why didn't you see them? Marcus asked. Elliot looked frustrated. I was looking through the camera. That usually helps. No. Elliot pointed towards the screen. I was using a long lens. Arthur filled most of the frame. The reflection is behind him. Oliver handed the camera back. Keep that image safe. I will. No deleting anything. Elliot's expression hardened. I wouldn't. Oliver nodded. I had to say it. Shortly before midday, Neil entered carrying news none of them wanted. The police aren't coming. Marcus stared at him. What? Not yet. Neil held the old landline handset loosely in one hand. I finally got through to the mainland. Oliver stood. What happened? There's been a landslip on the eastern road. When will it clear? They don't know. Marcus laughed in disbelief. Of course they don't. Neil continued. The causeway is open, but emergency vehicles can't reach it from the village. Can officers come on foot? Oliver asked. They're arranging something. When? Later today, hopefully. The word hopefully passed through the room like a cold draft. Their isolation had been extended, perhaps only by hours, perhaps longer. Lucy looked toward the windows. The mainland existed somewhere beyond the mist, close enough to imagine, still impossible to reach. Oliver stood. We continue exactly as before. Marcus groaned. More alibis? If necessary. Oliver looked around the room. Nobody goes anywhere alone. That received more attention. Henry frowned. You think someone is in danger. I think Arthur is dead. Someone was outside his locked study this morning, and another person ran from the West Wing after disturbing evidence. Oliver's voice remained controlled. I'd rather appear overly cautious than explain later why I wasn't cautious enough. Nobody argued. Lucy spent the next hour with Andrew in the archive room. Oliver had asked them to find anything relating to the Calder Hotel, Edward Bell, or Amelia's investigation, while he remained downstairs with Henry and Marcus. The archive room occupied a narrow space behind the library and smelled wonderfully of old paper, dust, and leather. Boxes filled metal shelving from floor to ceiling, each labeled in Arthur's precise handwriting. Andrew appeared more comfortable there than anywhere else in the house. This is where Arthur kept the parish records, he said quietly. Lucy smiled. I remember. He trusted me in here. There was sadness in the observation. You liked him. I knew him for 2 days. That wasn't what I said. Andrew considered that before nodding. No. He opened another box. I liked him very much. They worked mostly in silence. Arthur's filing system proved meticulous, but enormous. Amelia's research appeared throughout dozens of boxes, sometimes under her own name, sometimes arranged by year or subject. Lucy eventually found a box labeled AP, Personal Papers, 2016. Her pulse quickened. Andrew. He joined her at the table. Inside were newspaper cuttings, receipts, train tickets, and photocopies of handwritten notes. Nothing immediately referenced Edward Bell. Then Andrew removed a hardback book from the bottom. A novel? Lucy looked at the cover, an old edition of Rebecca. Andrew opened it. Something fell onto the table. A flower, pressed completely flat. Tiny blue petals. Lucy and Andrew stared at one another. Amelia, Lucy whispered. Andrew carefully turned the next page. There was handwriting in the margin, not Arthur's. Lucy recognized it immediately from the inscription inside Amelia's books. Only 6 words had been written. If anything happens, ask Helen why. Neither Lucy nor Andrew moved. The archive room seemed suddenly silent enough to hear their own breathing. Lucy read the sentence again, then a third time. Helen. There was only one Helen in Ravensmere House. Helen Sinclair, the retired judge. Andrew looked towards the closed archive room door. She knew Amelia. Lucy thought of Helen calmly analyzing every inconsistency since Arthur's death. Helen correcting Marcus. Helen defending Oliver's decision not to open the notebook. Helen claiming that uncertainty reminded people they were still capable of learning. And then Lucy remembered something else. When Henry had revealed Amelia believed she was being followed, Helen had immediately asked whether it had been reported to the police. Not why hadn't she reported it? She had asked why it wasn't reported. A tiny distinction, one Lucy hadn't noticed at the time. She knew, Lucy said. Andrew looked frightened now. Knew what? I don't know. Lucy carefully closed the book. But we're going to find out. They found Helen in the drawing room. She sat alone beside the fireplace with a cup of tea and one of Arthur's books resting across her lap. When Lucy entered carrying Rebecca, Helen looked first at Lucy, then at the book. For the briefest moment, her composure vanished. It returned almost immediately, but Lucy had seen it. Andrew closed the door behind them. Helen placed her cup down. Where did you find that? Lucy felt her heartbeat quicken. She hadn't shown Helen the note. She hadn't mentioned Amelia. She hadn't said anything at all. Yet Helen already knew the book. Lucy sat opposite her. I think you should tell me. Helen looked towards Andrew. Does Oliver know? Not yet. Then fetch him. Lucy didn't move. First tell me why. Helen studied her for a long moment. Then she closed the book on her lap. When Amelia Pembroke came before my court 10 years ago, she wasn't there as a journalist. Lucy felt the room tilt beneath the revelation. What was she there as? Helen's face seemed suddenly older. Not frightened, ashamed. A witness. Andrew stared at her. To what? Helen looked towards Amelia's portrait visible through the open drawing room doors. To a crime that officially never happened. Lucy tightened her grip around the book. Helen continued quietly. And I was the judge who made sure nobody ever heard her evidence.